since Germany is so often quoted as an example, or since I so often get questions about how do these things work in Germany, to talk a little bit about the German Energiewende, the German energy transition. First of all, background, why this, and then later I'll talk about the how and the policy issues. Why? This didn't start with Fukushima, that's very important. Actually, the really tough experience that Europe and Germany in particular had was of course Chernobyl. Mid-80s, and you see here the radiation map. Germany was quite strongly affected by this, and this really started how should I say it? It did not start the debate about nuclear power and its dangers, but it actually drew it much further. So this led to a general skepticism about nuclear power in Germany until the until the 90s, I must say. I think there have been no new nuclear power plants being built after the 1980s in Germany. In Germany, nuclear power, while it still was and still is to some extent operating, is basically a dead industry. It's no more new investment taking place. And I think German companies have also actually largely moved out of this. But what has happened is that by the year 2000, there was a compromise between the red-green government, as we called it at the time, and the industry about a kind of phased-out way about a timeline to phase out nuclear. And this is also not just related to Fukushima, but also started much earlier. The original plan was from the year 2000. There were some political movements in between in the year 2009-10, but after Fukushima, this became very clear. You see here in the timeline, nearly half of the German nuclear capacity was shut down in 2011 after Fukushima, and there is this phasing out up to the year 2022. We hope to have shut down all nuclear power plants up to that time. So, of course, and this is combined, I mean, the phasing out of nuclear is combined with a systematic policy of getting renewables in. We have now, this is German power production. This is not primary production, of course, primary energy sources, but sorry, it's a bit small. But we have about, by now in 2015, we have a renewable share of about 30%. This includes wind, offshore, also photovoltaics, biomass, and hydropower. Germany has a very low rate of hydropower because it doesn't have huge mountainous areas. But it shows you this share has actually grown a lot. But still, the German energy transition has still a huge way to go. It shows you that still up to now we use hard coal for 18%, lignite 24%. And actually, while there's no more black coal, hard coal production in Germany nowadays, virtually nothing, there's still large-scale lignite production going on. The lignite is part of our problem. The idea of the energy transition was to phase out nuclear, to bring down coal, to expand renewables, and to balance the rest by gas. But we have problems with gas. Gas is expensive, and Germany is hugely dependent on Russian gas, which is another problem. The nuclear share today is still about 14%, but that's foreseeable. That's about to go very soon. So here are the long-term goals. Yeah, you have I mean, these are general figures about overall power consumption compared. 2008, our long-term goals bring it down to 75% of what it was in 2008, energy consumption. So basically making huge increases in energy efficiency, actually also reducing the absolute amount of energy used. But this is in the range of maybe by something like maybe 25% gross energy production reduced by half, which is substantial for a highly industrialized society, of course. So why all this? Besides the nuclear. I just realized that India has been lost on this map. I'm very sorry for this. But this basically shows the solar intensity. No, I used to have a presentation before that, but something happened here. This is you see Germany here is not particularly endowed by sun, but still solar is being done in a big way. If you compare this to the US, it's more like Alaska actually. Whereas India is probably the solar map of India looks more like this part of the US. So it's not naturally particularly fantastic natural endowment with solar, but still, I mean, it works to quite an extent. One argument which has been made that is about energy security, and I think this is an argument which is not very much discussed here today, but of course in the Indian debate about alternatives to and bringing in renewables, this could also be a very, very strong argument. Because basically Germany is importing entirely, it's all its oil, 86% of its gas, 100% of its uranium, and even 80% coal. So basically Germany has, as regards fossil fuels and uranium, Germany has no resources. Yeah. So in that sense, energy security is of course being increased when we are moving to renewables. So this is a general overview about the relationship between economic development and renewables in Germany. And I think this is actually quite a stunning curve. We have basically the central message is that renewables have not hurt Germany's economy, which is of course growth is an argument in Germany as much as it is in India in the mainstream. The index figure here at 100 by the by 1991 we always use this as a starting date because this was just after unification. So this is the share of renewables in the electricity mix getting, well, in 2015 is nearly close to 30% now, and we have 7 times increase in renewables, and we have an increase of overall 80% of GDP production. So this has been going quite well. I mean, as against many who argue that basically the energy transition will kill Germany's industrial base. This has definitely not happened. And actually you also have, you can actually show that this is the overall economic, this is the overall GDP, what is it? That's the GDP growth. 91 to, this is a 30% GDP growth. And at the same time, and an emission and reduction, in absolute emissions of 22%. So there is actually, what is taking place is a decoupling. Yeah, you grow. And Germany works with, I mean, GDP grows while actually emissions go down. Yeah, good. Yeah, and these are also, I mean, this shows you a number of these ways. I mean, how Germany, actually the red line here, has been slowly but consistently basically producing more GDP with less energy. Some other countries of the world, some other parts of the world have been also doing this, but of course there are outliers. For example, I think in Latin America here you really have, no, the Middle East of course is as the largest fossil fuel producer, is of course the area of the world where perhaps this relationship is least there. And naja, good. So how has it been done? Basically 2 things which have really brought about this kind of broad-based renewable energy expansion in Germany. One is a guaranteed grid access for at least small and medium scale renewable producers. Absolutely fundamental. There's a law which basically says if you have a solar rooftop thing, if you have a wind power plant, if you have even a solar farm, that forces the discoms, yeah, the distribution companies, to buy these at agreed prices. I come about the prices at a particular time. They cannot say, okay, you are such a small producer, you are just only second or third option. They have to buy by priority. And then the other thing is the prices. That there have been, at any particular point in time, when you invested in Germany into renewable energies, and there was a fixed, you have basically got a fixed price for a guaranteed fixed price. These prices itself have changed over time. Yeah? It makes a big difference when you invested in a solar power plant in the year 2000. The rates you were guaranteed then were much higher than they are today because investment costs for solar were much higher in 2000. Yeah? But still, this is basically how the mechanism has worked. And so in many ways, actually for many people in Germany, investment in a solar rooftop is just a no-brainer. It makes perfect sense. If you own a roof, if you own your own house, if you have a roof, and if you don't even need to be particularly adventurous. My parents in their 70s have started this, but who are not very much adventurous, obviously, anymore. You can even get a loan from the bank for this, and then, given the very low interest rates which prevail in the German bank system, I mean, if you put money into the bank, you get 0.1% interest these days. Yeah? But investment in renewable gives you easily 5–8%. So this is the mechanism. No? I I explained, in 2005, a particular rate was set for 20 years. And the point is, of course, and perhaps sometimes in a way different from the Indian policy environment, you can trust, I mean, people in Germany trust those rates. Yeah, there will be no policy changes where suddenly the government will say, okay, we have sought twice and we will not pay you these rates. You trust in Germany that these rates will be paid over 20 years. Yeah? In 2005, they were higher, and over time, of course, let me say, the subsidy element has been reduced because the prices for solar panels, also for wind power plants, have come down so much. Yeah? This brings us to a point which plays a big role here in our debates also. I mean, this is a strong statement. German energy transition is a democratic movement. But it is very, very true. In the sense that we actually have, of the total installed capacity, which was then 2013, that's the last figure I have here, of 73 gigawatt, yeah? 47%, nearly half of the investment has been done by individuals or by small cooperatives. Yeah, the cooperatives which you also mentioned, I think there are many hundreds by now. I think I have even a figure. You have individuals putting solars on their rooftops, but for example, for wind power plants, yeah, where the investment sums nowadays are much higher. I mean, these things have become rather big in Germany by now. Yeah, you obviously need. I mean, these are not individual investors anymore, but I mean private individuals anymore. But these are, I mean, sometimes cooperatives, sometimes small companies. There's a strong role of individuals and co-ops. There's a strong role of institutional and strategic investors, and there's actually only 12% which the established energy supplying companies have invested. And this is a big problem they have today, yeah? Because there's a very strong move out of the fossil fuel sector, and some of the big energy corporations, both producers and they are both in distribution and in production, they have some difficulties today. So, oh yes, here's a figure with the cooperatives, which went, I mean, we had 888 in the year 2013. It's still growing. These are all cooperatives that I mean, I think most of them, I don't have the exact breakdown here, but most of them are probably cooperatives actually dealing with solar plants. Again, let me bring an example from home. What actually my parents did was not to put a solar panel on their own rooftop, but they actually got together with some neighbors and put the solar panel on top of the village hall. So, and they have founded a cooperative, and now every 3 months some money comes in from the cooperative. This entire movement started, I mean, or really took off largely with the boom in solar energy. The wind power started earlier, but the solar power boom started around the year 2007, 2008.
So it was probably an investment opportunity after the recession, 2008 thing maybe, right?
And of course, it's a lot, as I said, I mean, in Germany, nowadays you get, I mean, if you put your money into the bank, you have very low interest rates. And I mean, and you don't need to be particularly adventurous, yeah, to do this. Good. Okay, this is about the political support. Let me just say a word about the way it works. Maybe I didn't explain it precisely enough. The way it works is you make a contract. I mean, if you own a solar rooftop, then you have these what you would call net meters here in what you would call in India, basically meters which work in both directions. You have a very clear and transparent system of knowing how much power you have produced. It's also to check whether your system is still working right and how much you have fed into the grid, and you actually get paid by this through your power bill. Yeah? Vice versa, people who don't have this on their own power bill, they will actually see the different elements of how the power price is emerging. Yeah? So we have a base cost. I mean, a unit is, depending on the individual supplier. I mean, power is much more expensive in Germany than it is in India, of course. I should take this for granted. I mean, we need to take this for granted. But relatively speaking, Germany is not generally the cost of living and general prices are, of course, relatively high. Yeah? So this fits into that structure. But on the bill that you have is you have the base rate for power, and then you have, let me say, the certain subsidy, yeah, which is, for example, for the development of the solar sector. Yeah, it's actually you actually know a certain percentage per unit that actually which is on your bill mentioned. This is how you are subsidizing the development of solar power, and there's also another surcharge, a cess, as you may call it in India. for example, for grid development. Only 7% of the Germans have said that the use and growth of renewable energy is less important or not important at all. I mean, 70% would say, said it this survey in October 2014, 70% said it's very or extremely important to use and grow renewable energy in Germany. And another 20% say it's about. So there is a broad political consensus about it, which should not mislead us into believing that all would be fine. I mean, there's of course a lot of debate, particularly about the financial, the costs. I mean, there is a cost.
Okay, could you say something about the actual prices that were being paid before?
Well, you pay easily 25 cents, so let me say 25 cents for private, that would be in rupees, maybe something like 17, 18 rupees. 17, 18 rupees you pay. But this depends at different rates. Yeah? But definitely, different again from India, that's also perhaps important to stress. Yeah? It is the big consumers of power are not being charged higher amounts. Yeah? But basically the surcharge, for example, for renewables is basically flat, except for certain sectors in the industry, which are very energy intensive, and where these energy intensive industries made a deal with the government to basically say, okay, they don't have to pay these extra charges for renewables, because otherwise they would leave the country and we would lose the jobs. This is one of the constant problems that we have. Of course, energy intensive industries basically threaten their exit. And well,
Axel.
Yeah. This is about the price.
Why should it impact? If it will only impact positively.
This is about the. This is a picture that we should actually have a closer look at, because it's also showing some of the things which are going to happen when you really expand renewables. Yeah. So it is not that management of a grid, is affected by the volatility of renewables. Let's be honest about it. Yeah. It has an impact. It's manageable. It's technically feasible, but you have to manage this. This is not. It is no wonder that the engineers say, of course, it's easier to deal with base loads which are really stable over long term than rather short-term demand and supply management. Yeah. What we have reached now, 2012. These are figures. It's basically saying that we still in Germany. We are still in this phase, in this time where we have a huge, basically a strong base load. This base load by now, 3 years later, this has actually come down. Yeah, but there is still a kind of base load that is there, consisting out of hydro and
coal and gas,
even nuclear, and then this substantial socket of coal, which we are still using. Yeah, but we have by now days, in particular at a certain time and certain days, we have actually the renewables actually basically providing the entire power consumption of Germany. That happens in certain days at certain times. Of course, these are really very, very dramatic shifts. Yeah, here, for example, this was a projection that talked about 2020. We have situations like this already now. I think we had it for the first time in 2015. Yeah, on a sunny Sunday in Germany, it can actually happen. That actually the entire supply of renewable is already enough to supply the entire power in the country.
It has happened.
But of course, it's happening with wild fluctuations, and this needs to be managed. Let me just say something about gas, if I may still have 5 minutes. It was originally envisaged, to balance these differences, where is gas, coal and gas, to balance or to put a balance into these kind of wild fluctuations, by using very modern, high efficient, low emission gas power plants, which can be started and shut down on very short notices. You can start the entire plant within 20 minutes, different from a coal plant, which takes a day or so before you can really start it. This has not worked out the way as we had wanted it. That's a big problem. Because these plants are very expensive and the gas is very expensive. Yeah? So economically, the power supply companies still sit on their coal power plants, which make a lot of money for them, and it is difficult to force them to phase them out. There are political steps, but we just had a major debate some months ago, basically between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats in the governing coalition. The Social Democrats have a big problem with it because their workers' base, their political base, their constituency consisting of workers includes workers, particularly in the lignite mining sector, and it's a tricky thing both for the Social Democrats and the trade unions in Germany. Yeah. So, but interestingly, what is definitely not happening is that Germany is running short of energy. De facto, it's actually German energy exports actually increasing. And that is, if you think about it, it's not even that surprising, because there are many times when Germany actually has so much renewable, from this all additional established installed capacity, that we actually have a lot of times that actually Germany exports power to most usually the neighboring countries. Of course, there are also times when it imports. But overall, I think I don't know what the latest figures are, but basically Germany manages roughly to basically being largely self-sufficient.
Interconnected.
Yeah. Of course, there's a European grid. Of course, this is a very fundamental difference to the Indian.
There is a major issue as well here. Yeah. Because you're increasing your production of renewable in the country and you're delocalizing CO2 emission to other countries, because most of your export here is coal-based. The production of energy here is coal-based, which was exported to neighboring countries.
What? No, I mean that is, of course, if Germany exports power, you don't really see whether it's renewable or coal-based. But the point is that of course you have these kind of these strong shifts, basically because Germany exports because the renewable availability is so high.
Generally they export renewables only.
Well, this is observation.
You can't really say you export you export electrons, right?
So why would you export? Why wouldn't you cut down the fossil fuel production?
Sorry?
Why would you export? Why wouldn't you just cut down the fossil fuel?
The problem is that the coal power plants, you cannot shut them down that fast. That's the problem. They are very inflexible. They need time to adjust to the supply situation.
A day or so. That's not.
No, the gas. These new modern gas plants, you can actually regulate them, adjust them very fast. But with the coal power plants, don't ask me for the technical details. I think some of you guys will know much more about that. But this is really, let's not talk too much about it. There is a broad consensus. There's a strong popular commitment to this and a popular buying, because actually there are a lot of people in Germany, actually middle class people who actually make money from this. As I said, it's a no-brainer for many people in the middle class. And the major challenges, let me just a few things we have already mentioned. The most serious challenge we have right now is actually to adapt the grids, because we have huge amounts of power that, particularly wind power, created in the north, which is on the sea, which is very windy, and by now the major industrial centers have moved to the south of Germany since World War II, basically. And this needs there is a grid which basically reaches everything, but this grid needs to be expanded, and there are a lot of political battles around the grid expansion, because people are fine to have a solar rooftop. They are less fine if somebody else puts a big wind power mast, let me say 1 kilometer away from or only 500 meters away from their village, and they may not be happy at all if there is a high voltage power line cutting through the countryside. It's a typical problem of, well, whether you actually gain from it or you not gain from it. I mean, let's be realistic about that. There are price debates. I mentioned this very briefly. We can talk more about it if we want to go into this. Of course, the really major, of course, you can have a whole lecture on each of these points, but let me say the real major challenge, and also to have this putting this into perspective, I think I should say this, I should say this, where we are standing. We have reached renewable overall in the power sector of 30%, but this is still only about 11% of Germany's primary production, primary energy consumption. Because power is just about 1/3, a bit more than 1/3 of the entire power consumption of Germany. And the next big step is, of course, to change the transport system to electricity and produce this electricity by renewable means. And there are whole new ideas about how to produce this, actually to use the grid and even the cars which are connected to the grid from time to time as storage systems for electricity, the car batteries. But these are, of course, plans for the future. Good. I think we leave it at that. Yes. Okay. If you like to know more about it, we have actually, as Heinrich Böll Foundation, we have a whole website which is regularly updated with news about the www.energytransition.de.
One is in that graph of GHG emission reduction. For the last 3 to 4 years, it shows that it's growing up a little bit. Is it an impact of Fukushima and then closing down an increase in coal, or what is it? Because last 3-4 years, the graph showed.
There was the I think it is difficult actually to read this. One would have to read this in a bit more long-term perspective. The trend is definitely still there. I mean, the renewable share is growing. Yeah, and we actually, as we can see from the, I think from the power production, actually, the renewable, that is the renewables is growing. This is the emission. This is the emission thing, which is of course only in a very indirect way limited to, I mean, linked to power production necessarily. Yeah, so I can't really say, I really can't explain those details. But I mean, the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, well, it continues to be an issue, a strong issue for Germany. There's no doubt about that. But it is also linked not just to the renewables.
I'm just asking,
Yeah.
why is that?
What is that?
Why is that?
Flattened.
It dropped fast. It dropped fast in 2008 because this was economic crisis, and then with the economic recovery, you see, the economic recovery, yeah, is basically has brought it down, and then no, the economic downturn brought the emissions down, and then with a sharp rise again afterwards, the emissions got up a little bit. But at least if you take the scales of this table series, the growth. The growth again after 2008, the economic growth has been higher than the growth in emissions, at least in relationship.
Yeah. The second question is, can you suggest something in an economic situation like India, like where the interest rates are high, where there is no guaranteed high feed-in tariff? The best we have is net metering. So what would be the expected sort of push in India if we want to go for a renewable transition?
I mean,
Is economic different?
it is very different. I'm not saying this is obviously not a model that India can in any way copy. I mean, for several reasons. I mean, first, of course, because India is a relatively poor country, and secondly, because the grid doesn't have this kind of outreach. The entire debate that you have here about off-grid solutions doesn't apply in Germany. There is virtually nobody. There's hardly any house, I suppose, except for some houses in the high Alps maybe, which are not connected to the grid. It's an entirely grid-based society, and this entire scheme is linked to is of course works by selling renewable power to the grid. I mean, through the grid, yeah, to the entire system. So that definitely cannot be compared. But at least showing, I mean, what is there for India? You can actually show that you can increase the share of renewables by substantial amounts without destabilizing the power supply. I mean, the classical argument by engineers, which I still heard here 3-4 years ago, was basically saying grid cannot take it, but grid can take it. Yeah, that's one lesson. And then the question is, to what extent you can actually organize a buy-in by the middle class to do this. Yeah, and perhaps Ashish, to turn Ashish's argument or to drive it a little bit further, maybe if you have some limits, yeah, of power you can actually get from the grid. You may actually say, okay, and beyond that, build up your own solar powers and feed into the grid. That gives some incentives in this direction. Yeah? Make it more expensive and bring people to investing into renewables on the rooftop. It's a possibility one may think about. It's something that is coming to my mind after our discussion today.
I think in Germany, the fact that you had such high prices even before the transition has really been a big contributor. I still think it's amazing.
I totally agree.
I think we have to remember that.
Of course. There's not been a subsidy on energy, not in the direct monetary way at least, in Germany. Yeah? Actually, energy has been taxed. Fuel is hugely taxed. The fuel you buy at a German fuel station you pay, I think 75% of the money you pay is actually taxes. Power is not taxed in that same high way, but it's also taxed. So this entire system of, let me say, politicized energy subsidies that you have in India under aspects of distributive justice, yeah, which make a lot of sense from the perspective of the Indian political system. You didn't have this. And I mean, but this kind of the culture of subsidy in this respect creates a certain, let me call it, political hangover, perhaps, yeah.
No, but
that is a problem.
It's not just subsidy. See, in Germany, I have a feeling that it's more than the residential consumers are cross-subsidizing some of your industry. And that's the catch. Because if you had 19 rupees or 20 rupees per kilowatt hour before the transition,
of course,
clearly it's higher than, and your industry was paying lower rates, especially those energy intensive.
So they still do.
So what you've got is, in Germany, you've got the opposite. You've got residential consumers cross-subsidizing industry, whereas in India, we've got industry cross-subsidizing. So you've got, I mean,
of course, yes.
The system was made for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no disagreement about it. Let me just say one word about, let me say the social impact, because we have a certain debate, which is a bit on the sideline of the mainstream debate, but it is there, and I think it is important from an alternative perspective, and also from if you look at the interests of rather poor parts of the population. There is a debate that those who actually make gains from the financial gains from this energy transition, from the model of the buy-in that we have, is actually the middle class. The middle class is very broad in Germany, probably 60% or whatever of the population, depends on how you define it, 70%. But there are, of course, there's a substantial part of the population, 20%, 30%, 40%, who do not own houses on which they could put rooftop solars. Actually, there's even traditionally in Germany, many people actually live in rented accommodation. That is a cultural thing also, and it also made a lot of economic sense, because at least for long periods of time, over decades, it was cheaper, relatively speaking, to rent rather than to buy. Quite different from India. So, but you have a substantial parts of people who are actually who are living in rented houses, who cannot participate in the system. And actually, of course, everybody has to pay the surcharge. Yeah. And now, of course, you have certain cases where people suddenly, where you read in the newspaper, okay, this year so and so many people have been disconnected in Berlin from power because they didn't pay their power bill. Some of them because they didn't want, but others also because they couldn't. Yeah.
And this German academic called Elmar Altwalter. You heard of him?
I'm not sure right now, but maybe there's also pronunciation.
He makes
Elmar
Altwalter.
Altwalter, of course, Elmar Altwalter. Yeah.
So he makes this argument that the only way forward for a more socialist society is a shift to renewable energy. That the growth of capitalist economies is due to the availability of cheap fossil fuels, and renewable energy does not allow you the scale to run massive automobile plants, massive aviation industries. But I'm wondering, because the point that somebody made about the embedded energy, a lot of energy intensive industries might already have shifted out of Germany into Eastern Europe.
And others are in the country by reduced subsidies. Yes.
Yeah, so therefore that model is not, so in India, for instance, if we have a massive shift to renewables, because we have a large developmental mandate as well, building schools, hospitals, etc.
Yeah.
India would necessarily have to look at another, you won't be able to run all your energy intensive industries through renewables. So there is that possibility of the argument that Altwalter makes in maybe developing countries, not so much in post-developed economies like Germany.
Yeah, there is a huge debate actually. Elmar Altwalter comes from from a classical leftist socialist position, I would say. You have also, of course, Ashish, you know that team very well. We've been at the degrowth conference, and I think there's a consistent groundswell in Germany in green leftist politics, yeah, and there's a certain overlap, even though they come maybe from different political traditions, which basically say that, of course, we have to pursue this energy transition, but at the same time we actually have reduced consumption, including energy consumption. All this degrowth politics. That's very much there, but of course this is a constituency in Germany, which will maybe. I'm not too sure. I doubt that it would count for more than 5-6% or so or maybe, well, it depends on how you count, but maybe up to. But it is not even the green, not even the green electorate. Yeah, it is much lower. It's only part of the green electorate, and there are of course many people who are not going to vote to elections anymore, who are so frustrated with the system, who may share these positions. Yeah, so it is definitely a minority position. This kind of this is the message I'm trying to get. It is possible to trying to make. It's possible to do these things, even with in a kind of democratic consensus principle, in a kind of rather mainstream, real-world society like Germany. But of course, you have to guarantee the people, at least the large majority of the people, that they won't lose.